We can speak now to Robin Simcox. He specialises in counter-terrorism and national security at the Heritage Foundation. Robin, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us. Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs in France said that we are waking up in a more dangerous world. Do you agree?
Well, thanks. It's great to be with you. I think, we know what the French government are saying on this. There's the fear of retaliation attacks from Iran because Soleimani was such a significant figure that there may be some kind of blowback in terms of an Iranian response. I think my point would be that Qassem Suleimani is someone who has blood on his hands. I mean, this is somebody responsible for various Iran fighting forces around the world. He was responsible in helping plan attacks on US and British soldiers in Iraq between 2003 and 2011. I think a plausible thing to say he's one of the world's most dangerous individuals. And so while I see where the French are coming from on this, I choose to focus on the fact that somebody who has been responsible for so much suffering both in Iran and outside of it, is now no longer operating, and I would say that's a good thing.
Yeah, I take your point, and the blood on his hands thing has indeed, I think, been sort of acknowledged by many people, and we've seen celebrations in the streets in the Middle East from some people, and indeed other international powers, admitting the fact that this was a man who directed and authorized a lot of violence. But that can be true at the same time as raising concern about what has taken place, the legality potentially of it, not least the potential effect somewhere like Iraq. I mean, Richard Haas, former advisor to Colin Powell, one sure result of this is that the era of US-Iraq cooperation is over. The result will be greater Iranian influence, terrorism, and infighting in Iraq.
Well, yes, I think in terms of the legality, the US are saying that they, as Soleimani has been responsible in conducting attacks on US citizens, and we've seen some of this towards the end of last year as well, where a US contractor was killed in Iraq, the US say that they are acting entirely in self-defense. I think in terms of the consequences of Soleimani's death across the Middle East, of course, it's only responsible that the US and its allies in the region look at the second, third, and fourth order effects. And with Iran, we have to be cognizant of potential kidnapping, of potential attacks on embassies, on attempts to disrupt international markets, possibly even a cyber response. And I think any responsible government would be looking as how to prepare for that. And the US has already begun to move some troops around. It's stationed more in Kuwait in terms of a possible response. But, we may also see Iran bide its time in terms of a response. We shouldn't necessarily expect anything immediate. There's no denying, and I don't disagree with Richard Haas in that it's a very, very significant move. It's one that previous US presidents, especially George W. Bush, contemplated and pulled back from because of Soleimani's importance within the Iranian system. So while we can be grateful that Soleimani can no longer inflict terror and fear on other people, it's only right that we think about what are the consequences now for both the US, its allies like the UK, and the broader Middle East region.
Yeah, just going back to the legality, Agnes Callamard, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Executions, has taken real issue with this. She said outside the context of active hostilities, the use of drones for targeted killing is almost never likely to be legal. And this issue of an imminent attack says that effectively the action has to be proportionate, and that test is unlikely to be met in this case. There is this criticism of the United States that the rule of international norms applies to it and no one else.
Well, I suppose the way I would look at this is if you think of US drone activity outside of Iraq, but think of the operations that's taken place in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Pakistan, there's often a dispute over the meaning, essentially, of imminence in terms of the US responding to imminent attacks. I think the better way to view it is the way the US view it, as an ongoing threat. They see an ongoing threat from individuals within those regions and respond to them like that. And, the US has received a lot of criticism about its drone strike policy in countries like that, but not only is it carried on doing so, I think, with increasingly less criticism internationally, but also those countries have given permission on some and many occasions for the US to carry out attacks within their own borders.
That's another thing about this, isn't it? It doesn't appear that any authorization was, this was an attack on Iraqi soil. They're condemning it. It seems to be done without forewarning of any allies. This is America acting alone, unilaterally, in a sort of post-2003 way, as a policeman of the world, in a sense?
I think it's going to get complicated diplomatically between the US and Iraq. I mean, I think there is part of me that thinks it's inevitable that Iraq have come out and said this publicly. We don't always know what is being said privately, but it certainly looks as if this is something that's going to cause problems within Iraq. The US argue that they had intelligence that Qassem Suleimani was planning imminent attacks on US diplomatic service and US embassies, and they were acting in self-defense. But of course, this is the Middle East. It's going to get extraordinarily complex. There's a lot of competing factors going into it, and it's not always black and white, and it's not always easy to carry out actions that are going to be uniformly positive or even uniformly negative. I think the Soleimani case, the US has obviously weighed up the facts on the ground, the damage he has done in the past, and decided that the responsible thing, once it got the intelligence that they knew his movements and that new attacks were being planned, was to carry out this strike. But of course, it's complex regionally.
Robin, thank you for your time. Robin Simcox there.